but who better than me?
Welcome back to the channel, and we've got even more end of year awards, and this one was very hard. This is the male performance of the year 2022. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't state I had a hard time whittling this down to 5. And there were some amazing performances that took place this year. But what I want to do, before I get to the top 5, I want to just give you the 3 that didn't make it. But they were so good, I felt they were deserving of praise and comment. So, the first of them, I guess the last out of the, let's call it number 8 for instance, yeah? Alexander Usyk's performance against Anthony Joshua in the rematch for the Unified Heavyweight Championships of the world. Now, you have to look at this in more than one aspect. It wasn't just what took place in the ring, it was everything that preceded it. The kind of mental pressure and the situation that was going on in Ukraine at the time, that is still going on, that Alexander Usyk left, the comforts of the US to go and be with troops and support the country and do what he was doing, setting up the Usyk Foundation, paying for housing and stuff, and has been doing all this regeneration, doing all of that, leaving that, coming to training. We heard stories about he had lost 20 kilos at one time. Then it looked like he was over 240 pounds coming up coming up towards fight week. Come to find he ends up being the same type of weight that he was in the first fight. And he faced an invigorated Anthony Joshua, who most people thought all he has to do is change this and that, and he'll run through Usyk. And Usyk had heard all of that and expected that fight and even planned for that fight. I had that fight 117, 112. So if anything, there was a swing even round, which if you swung it to Usyk, then it was exactly the same score as it was in the first fight. But Joshua did a lot better, caused a lot more problems. Usyk rode through those storms and did what a champion does in spectacular fashion between rounds 10 to 12, and just dominated and stole the show. So for that reason, I had to give consideration to that. Now, the number 7 has to be Bam Rodriguez's performance against Saritsvakat Sorongvasai. Look, the fight before that, he jumped up 2 weight classes on 5 days notice and won a world title, which I believe is unheard of in the modern era at least. Then he goes on to face the most fearsome puncher in the division, the one person that no one really wants to face, that only Estrada has been able to beat prior. The guy that took out the legend Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez, not only outclasses him and beats him up badly, stops him in the 8th round. A guy that's never been knocked out before got knocked out by this guy that's just come up 2 different weight classes. So that was a masterful performance, and definitely something that was in consideration, and for a long time it was on my list. I was sad that I had to drop it down, but there's a couple fights I thought were a bit more deserving. And the last of those fights, just before we get to the top 5, to me has to go to Jordan Gill for his performance against Kareem Guerfi. Now, it wasn't a masterclass or a pure domination of a similarly matched opponent, but what it was a performance of grit, heart and determination. I mean, let's not be kidding ourselves here. Jordan Gill got DDT'd in the ring, a legitimate, not a WWE staged one where they know how to fall. He legitimately landed on his head and neck and rolled over and was concussed from that moment on. Not to mention he had 2 perforated eardrums, burst both eardrums, had an issue with his leg, could barely stand up, and just had to resort to almost covering up in the corner, just trying to look for shots and look for angles, and somehow managed to pull out a perfect 1-punch KO to knock Kareem Guerfi clean out and leave him laying on the floor. So just due to the grip, the determination, and just the sheer heart of that performance, it had to get considered. But now, with that out the way, let's get to the top 5 male performances of 2022. My number 5 male performance of the year goes to David Morrell for his fight against Ados Yobasunalai. Now, look, the way the fight ended is harsh, and it makes it almost, uncomfortable to put this fight in that list. But when you watch the fight, bearing in mind this wasn't against an opponent that was overmatched or someone that, nobody thought had a chance, or he was literally just in there as a tune-up or whatever. No, Ados is a Kazakhstanian. First of all, he had a very deep amateur pedigree. He had called for this fight for quite a while, so long in fact that he actually decided not to fight previously until he actually got in the ring. He was a credible threat, a very strong, tough individual with a very good amateur pedigree. David Morrell beat him badly from round 1 to round 12 when he knocked him out. It was if not including the 12th round, it was a 11-0 to 10-1 type of fight in terms of how you scored it. It was masterful, the in and out work, the viciousness, the spitefulness. Ados probably should have been pulled out of that fight a couple of rounds before. Face was a bloody mess, like it was disconfigured and discombobulated. David Morrell just done a number. He made it, and he made it look effortless against a guy that was not a stiff in that ring. So for that's my number 5 fight, male performance I should say, for 2022. My number 4 performance of the year for 2022 has to go to Sonny Edwards for his fight against Felix Alvarado. Now, I am not gonna lie, people who know me sort of know my recent thoughts on Sonny. I always thought he was a cool guy until a certain situation happened. So, there's a level of loyalty that I employ, and maybe even some biasness when I do discuss Sonny, but it's always more the person as opposed to the fighter. On this occasion, to me, this was a performance of the year standard, purely because I believed that Sonny would actually lose, not because he's not a better boxer than Felix Alvarado, but stylistically this is a horrendous matchup for most people. Sonny is a pure boxer by trade who, I think it's safe to say doesn't crack the hardest, doesn't necessarily have the punch that makes people decide to be a bit more cautious. Felix was on his chest, was trying to get to him all fight, and it played out exactly as I thought, except I did think that he would get stopped between sort of rounds 10 and 11, with him dominating the first third of the fight, but then Felix sort of coming back a bit in the middle, and then just ended up a sustained punishment, when Sonny starts to slow down and just, get taken out just due to that volume and just being worn out and beaten up and just hurt, because Felix hits really hard. But not only did Sonny totally boss the first half of the fight for the majority, in the second half, he was comfortable enough and confident enough to literally lay on the ropes and allow Felix to expend energy trying to tag him, almost rope-a-dope style. But you would see, watching the fight, slowly adjusting his arm to make sure that the arm took the brunt of a lot of the shots as opposed to the rib cage or the kidneys, like moving his head just a bit up top to slip certain punches or take most of the sting out of them on the side that wasn't guarded, keeping the right arm up close to take away a lot of the impact on the left side. I mean, don't get me wrong, he got buzzed a few times, he got hurt a few times. He said it himself in the post-fight press conference. He even said he thinks that he broke it, busted a bone in his elbow due to some of the punches he took, and busted up his hands because Felix had a hard head. All of this, but I'm not gonna say he dominated the fight, but like I said, he dominated the first half of it. I think I had that 4-2 or 5-1, something like that. But the way he controlled the fight and even was comfortable in spots of uncomfortability for most people was something that I feel doesn't get spoken enough about. And I've always said, hate him or love him, he's like a top 5 boxing brain, ring IQ in the world, in my opinion. And I have to give credit where credit's due. So to me, that's my number 4 male performance of the year for 2022. So my number 3 male performance of the year for 2022 goes to Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez for his fight against Julio Cesar Martinez. Now, Martinez was a late replacement for Juan Francisco Estrada, who pulled out. This was supposed to be where the original trilogy took place. Said he was suffering COVID symptoms from delayed or still ongoing occurred symptoms from earlier on that year and the last year. Now, Martinez came up and a lot of people thought he'd be too young, too fresh, and he's going to hit too hard, you know, for Chocolatito. The fact he's not having to, you know, sort of drain himself down to 112 would work in his favor. He came in the ring. He even came in overweight on the, you know, on the day of the fight, and on the weigh-ins, I mean, and didn't even make the 115 limit. I think he went on the scales at 116 or something like that. Fight still went ahead, and Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez showed you why he has for a long time been viewed as one of the best fighters like ever of this modern era, and why he was a undisputed number 1 pound for pound star, you know, several years ago before the first Wrong Versailles fight. He rolled back the years. He literally used Martinez for target practice for the majority of that fight. He pulled off shots from angles that weren't supposed to be possible at times, and everything was fluid. There was nothing that he loaded up on. Literally everything was just one motion to the other. He pretty much took the majority of the shots back on the gloves, you know, on the forehead, rode them on the shoulders, you know. Yeah, he took a couple of shots, but there was nothing. He was never at one point in any sort of distress or discomfort in that fight. It was an amazing performance, and the only thing that didn't happen is Martinez getting knocked out, which realistically some of the shots he took would have knocked out most people, because they've knocked out, you know, more durable and probably better technical boxers and fighters than Julio Cesar Martinez. So that's why my number 3 male performance of the year goes to Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. Now we're getting to the good stuff. So my number 2 male performance of the year for 2022 goes to Dimitri Bivol for his performance against Zurdo Ramirez. Now, the reason I give him this bout is, while, look, there's a reason it's not number 1. It could have been number 1, and it was going to be for a long period of time. But then I had to think about the level of opponents between number 1 and number 2, and I had to factor that in. Now, in this fight, there's a big argument you could make that Zurdo Ramirez has never faced a top class world level fighter in his 44 fights that he had previous. And you could also, I guess, make the argument, well, he came up from 168, like, so he was a smaller guy moving up. But this is a guy that somehow was managing to make 168, and you don't really know how, because this guy is rehydrating at 175, over 200 pounds in the ring, like putting on over 25 pounds of weight back after weigh-in days. And he's been doing some good work, and stylistically you would say that he is the nightmare for Dimitri Bivol, southpaw, and a southpaw pressure fighter that works up close, throws punches in bunches, and is a very big body puncher, whereas Dimitri Bivol is more of a pure boxer. However, in this particular fight, Dimitri Bivol showed what happens when you know how to control distance. He was the shorter guy, shorter reach, yet he out-jabbed and out-landed and out-threw Zurdo Ramirez. He basically had his way with him from round 1 to round 12. Yes, he didn't win every single round, but even the rounds that he lost, he was very comfortable in, and you could tell it's almost like he's just taking a bit of time off to assess what's going on and how he's gonna carry on going on about his work. And he literally, every advantage that you thought Zurdo Ramirez would have in this fight, he took them all away. He fought him up close. He even was able on the inside to push Ramirez back and be the stronger man. You know, that's not something anyone thought was going to happen. So he literally did what an elite level fighter does to a fighter that's just very, very good. And again, because of the stylistic advantages that Ramirez had, that's one of the reasons why I rate this fight so highly. But again, because Dimitri Bivol is a proven elite level fighter and Gilberto Ramirez isn't in that pantheon, you know, if you look at the resume, that's the only reason it was at number 2 instead of number 1. But when you hear the number 1, maybe you'll understand why. But congrats to Dimitri Bivol. Number 2 male performance of the year for 2022. Right, here's the big one. So, my number 1 male performance of the year for 2022 goes to Kenshiro Taraji for his performance against Hiroto Kiyoguchi back on the 1st of November, which was a Ring Magazine, WBC and WBA unification at light flyweight. Now, the reason this fight was so significant, because at the end of 2021, I believe it was September, Taraji lost his belt to Masamichi Habuki in, I think it was a 10th round stoppage. I can't remember exactly how the fight went, but I think the ref called it off because he was like a bloody mess. He was sort of getting beaten and battered. It wasn't really a great time for him. A lot of fights had been falling through and he just wasn't himself. He comes back in March of this year and, you know, what more can you say? Basically rights that wrong and stops Masamichi Habuki within the 3rd round to get his WBC title back. But at this time, Hiroto Kiyoguchi was then sort of seen as the consensus number 1 in the division. You know, he sort of gained ground and now he looked like the guy to beat. He looked like the main guy in the division. So this was definitely a number 1 versus number 2 scenario. And that's part of the reason why this fight ends up being performance of the year, because he played with Hiroto Kiyoguchi throughout the majority of this fight. His jab, his distance control, his movement, everything was just giving Hiroto fits. He couldn't really get off a lot of his own work. He had some successes, but he was just getting slowly beaten up from round 1 all the way to round 8, I think, when this fight was stopped. It was round 7 or round 8. Now, although he lost the fight, Taraji also was able to show a granite chin and being able to weather a storm, because in the 5th round, he dropped Hiroto Kiyoguchi and then went for a stoppage, and it almost looked like he punched himself out. Hiroto came back and hit him clean with several really big shots, to the point where you thought the tide was about to turn and Kiyoguchi was about to get the knockout that Taraji was trying for. But Taraji managed to weather the storm. He managed to see out the end of the round, did what he needed to do. Round 6, round 7, back on that stick. Again, just going back to what was working, slowly just breaking down Kiyoguchi again. And as I said, I think it was the 8th round, but took him out with a devastating right hand, which basically took away all of his senses. He fell back, and then Taraji just finished it off with another right hand, which almost sent Kyoguchi through the ropes. The ref had to save him from falling out through the ropes. He was gone, just out like a light. And again, because it was a consensus number 1 versus number 2, and the level of performance he put on, especially after everything that had happened previous to that, that's why Kenshiro Taraji is my male performance of the year for 2022.